My spoiled daughter refuses to invite her uncle to her wedding even though he babysat her every day when she was little. Why is she acting like this? I, 52F, am currently in the process of helping my daughter, F36, plan her wedding to her fiancé, F38. We are currently in the process of planning out the guest list. I'm paying for half of the wedding, so I think it's only fair that I have some input into who gets invited. We were talking about who to invite, and I mentioned my siblings, M46, F54, F49, F48, and F50. She mentioned inviting my sisters, since they live on the same side of the country as us, but when I mentioned my brother, she got really reluctant all of a sudden. She said she didn't want to force him to travel, and I mentioned I could ask him later, and she just got quiet and said, "We'll think about it." I got upset and said that she could invite all of my siblings, or none of my siblings. She said that wasn't fair, since it was her wedding. I'll admit, I got a little upset and said that I was paying for half of it, and she'd made me wait for this long enough. So the least she could do was to invite my family. She got mad and said that she never asked for me to fund it, and she didn't need my money anyway. I left before I'd say something I'd regret, and drove around for a bit. I called my husband, 64M, and he said it was her wedding, and it was really up to her who she invited. I told him he didn't understand since he's an only child. He got upset and we argued for a few minutes before hanging up and driving back over to her place. I let myself in, and I heard her talking to her fiancé about how if I didn't insist that her brother's kids had to come, she'd be fine with inviting my brother. I walked in, scoffed, and said if she's worried about the number of people she had to invite, I could get a big venue, and inviting one more person won't cost that much more. She screamed at me that it's not about that, and to get out of her house and out of her life. I told her not to raise her voice at me, and her fiancé said I had to leave or they'd call the police. So, I went home and told my husband what happened. He said I messed up big time, but I really don't think inviting him is that big of a deal. Ida?
Comment from the fiancé of original poster's daughter. I have my fiancé's permission to post the following. Her uncle was physically, mentally, and sexually abusive. It began when she was 10, and escalated until he got her pregnant at the age of 14. She told her mom because she had to get an abortion, and the moment they left the clinic, her mom said, "This never happened." Her mom is the only person who knew until me. Update from daughter's fiancé. Trigger warning, involuntary psychiatric hold, mental illness, threats of self-harm. First off, thanks to everybody who reached out. Your kind words were really helpful and much needed. I really appreciate every one of you. You all rule. Most importantly, my fiancé is doing fine. She's been in therapy for years, and her doctor has been really helpful. We're still in a hotel, and our management company is working to get us into another building. Yesterday, we got a call from our super, real-life dude. We told him about the situation, and asked him to tell us if MIL stopped by again. Well, she sure did. Real-life dude told me he'd heard her banging on the door, screaming to let her in. He confronted her, and said she had to leave or he'd call the cops. She started yelling that she had a right to see her daughter. He left to call the cops, but when he came back, she was gone. However, she left him something to remember her by. She took a dump on our welcome mat. We were shocked, but we checked our Ring camera, and it was all there. It'd be almost funny if it wasn't so fucked up. We later got a call from BIL saying MIL was in a 72-hour psychiatric hold. She apparently went to a convenience store and ended up knocking over some displays and threatening suicide multiple times. The cops were called, no charges were filed, but she was placed into a 72-hour hold. So that's where we are. We're going to be using this time to move all of our stuff to a storage unit while we look for a new apartment, so there's no chance she can find us at our current place. I still don't know what the future looks like, but it's better than what it was before. Final update from daughter's fiancé. My relationship with my mother-in-law finally came to a head today. My fiancé was raised by a sexist, religious family. Mother-in-law was a teen mom who was groomed by her youth group leader, and her parents forced her to marry him. My fiancé's uncle was a sexual, physical, and emotionally abusive monster. It began when she was 10, and escalated until he got her pregnant at the age of 14. She told her mom because she had to get an abortion, and the moment they left the clinic, her mom said, "This never happened." Her mom is the only person who knew until me. She was always cagey about her family, and for the first few years of our relationship, she would call them almost daily, but refused to introduce them to me or see them in person. She didn't tell me until her brother's wife got pregnant. She broke down crying, saying she needed to protect his kids from her uncle. That night it all came out. I was so angry. She reluctantly started visiting her parents after the kids were born because she wanted to make sure she could protect them from mother-in-law as well. Thankfully, her uncle moved across the country a few years ago, and has never met the kids. We recently got engaged, and we were planning our wedding. Mother-in-law found out and said she was paying for half, and started talking about the guest list. She insisted on inviting my fiancé's uncle, and they got into a huge argument where mother-in-law started pulling plates out of our cabinet and dropping them, and we had to physically push her out of the apartment and lock the door. She banged on the door for a few minutes before storming off. Later, my fiancé started talking about how she could maybe appease her mom if she could invite her uncle but not her brother's kids. Her mom found a spare key, and unlocked the door and waltzed in like nothing had happened. She pretended like she didn't see the issue, and started complaining that we could just get a bigger venue so we could invite everyone. It escalated, and I had to threaten to call the cops to get her to leave. Mother-in-law then made an "Am I the asshole" post and was willfully obtuse to everyone who clearly picked up on what was wrong. MIL sent my fiancé the post because she thought people would be on her side. My fiancé was furious, and told me this was it. She was going no contact with her, and I could tell people in the thread what happened. So, that's it. She's blocked on all our phones, and she's finally going to tell her brother what happened. A whole can of worms has been opened, but a weight has been lifted as well. Reminder, I am not the original poster.